Deputy Commissioner Martinez, the meeting is now live. You may begin when ready, sir.
Ernest, thank you so much, and good morning to everyone. My name is Ray Martinez, and I serve as Deputy Commissioner for Academic Affairs and Workforce Education at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone this morning to this inaugural meeting of the Texas Transfer Advisory Committee. You'll hear it referred to occasionally by some of myself and some of our staff as TTAC, but you are the Texas Transfer Advisory Committee, so welcome and good morning. This meeting is taking place, as you know, via video conference. It is also being broadcast via the internet. So before we begin, let me ask everyone to please observe the following etiquette. First, please state your name before you speak. Second, please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. And third, we'd ask you to please keep background noise to a minimum to the best extent that you can. After Commissioner Keller provides opening remarks and introduces our co-chairs, we will then officially convene the meeting, offer introductions, do a roll call, and of course, introduce all of our TTAC members and our co-chairs, et cetera. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Harrison Keller, who was appointed on October 1st, 2019 as the 6th Commissioner of Higher Education and serves as the Chief Executive Officer of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. Good morning, Commissioner Keller. It's all yours, sir.
All right. Good morning, Ray, and good morning to all of you. I'm Harrison Keller, Commissioner of Higher Education. For those of you I haven't had the opportunity to meet yet, and so let me first start just by thanking each of you for your willingness to serve on this very important new advisory committee. So I and my colleagues at the coordinating board, we're looking forward to working with you. And I also want to thank the institutions you represent for supporting your role, for nominating you as a member of this advisory committee. So when I first became commissioner, I made improving transfer one of my highest priorities for the agency. We all know from years of experience that many students and their advisors often have trouble understanding the potential transferability and applicability of courses to degree programs, and the lack of transparency in transfer pathways can often lead to inaccurate advising, well-intentioned, but inaccurate advising and excess credit hours for our students. So of course, there are a number of examples and represented by many of your institutions where the individual institutions have come together to work on this problem. And there's important lessons to be learned through those partnerships and the advising tools that they've developed and that they use. But as a state, we have a long way to go to ensure that every student and every advisor across the state will be able to understand and navigate the transfer process. We're making good progress. As you'll hear later this morning from Stacy Silverman, the work across institutions that led to the passage of Senate Bill 25 in the last legislative session was a powerful step in the right direction. And we are working with your institutions and other institutions to make significant progress in implementing the requirements of the legislation. Over the next year, we're also going to be working closely with the institutions to deploy other resources to streamline and support transfer. And that'll include new training resources to help advisors in high schools and colleges support implementation of the new Texas Transfer Framework. So based on the recommendations you and your colleagues will develop, we'll be able to rapidly deploy resources to increase that awareness and accelerate implementation across the state. In a few minutes, you're going to hear more about the informal work group that led to the Texas Transfer Framework. We had 10 individuals that came together last year and worked with us at the coordinating board to develop this new framework. And this work group that was comprised equally of community college and university representatives had a lot of candid, insightful, productive discussions about what was happening in the field, bringing their practical wisdom. They discussed common misconceptions about transfer and what was happening, and also spent time looking at the data. And I want to say I'm deeply appreciative of these representatives, and especially the co-chairs of the working group, James Hallmark and Jacob Frari, and to Ray Martinez, Stacy Silverman, and our coordinating board team. So thanks to that group's hard work and genuine spirit of collaboration, we have a new Texas transfer framework that was created formally adopted by the coordinating board this past March. And I think most importantly, that work group agreed up front to set aside individual institutional interests and focus primarily on what would be best for students. I'm very excited about this work because it's been carefully designed to provide clarity to our students while preserving room for faculty-led curricular innovations, both by sending and by receiving institutions. And it's designed to provide clear parameters for Texas versions of associate's degrees for transfer. So students could see a pathway to be able to transfer up to 60 hours from community colleges to universities. Because of this, I believe that through your work, we're going to substantially improve vertical transfer in Texas in the next several months and in the years ahead. As many of you know all too well, this work is urgently needed right now, especially given the substantial drops in vertical transfer that we saw this past year, especially for our low-income students. And so, now I'm going to hand it off to the co-chairs and introduce the co-chairs of the Texas Transfer Committee. Dr. Laurel Williamson is Deputy Chancellor and College President for San Jacinto College. Previous to her time at San Jacinto College, Laurel was Chief Academic Officer at Valencia Community College in Florida and at Lower Columbia College in Washington. I appreciate working with Laurel across multiple fronts. She and her chancellor are trusted colleagues and great advisors and partners with us on multiple fronts. I appreciate her willingness to take on this role. And then Dr. James Hallmark is Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at the Texas A&M University System, where he advises and assists the chancellor by providing executive leadership and direction in academic related areas and initiatives. Prior to joining the A&M System office, James was Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs at West Texas A&M University. Also appreciate James and his colleague at A&M Systems. They've been really important partners and colleagues across multiple fronts. So both Laurel and James were members of our informal transfer group last year. Of course, they're well known and respected by their peers across the state. And at the coordinating board, we deeply appreciate their wise counsel. I'm about to hand it off to Laurel and James to officially convene the meeting and introduce the members of the Texas Transfer Advisory Committee. Before I hand it off, I did want to ask: do the members of the committee have any questions for me? All right. Well, we have a full agenda ahead of us. I'm, again, looking forward to working with you, and I know all of my colleagues at the coordinating board are. So at this time, then I'll hand it off to Laurel to officially convene the meeting and begin the introductions. Laurel?
Thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Keller, for that kind introduction and your generous comments about the work of the transfer work group. I do think that we did good work and that we have a good foundation on which to proceed. So it is my pleasure, in collaboration with my co-chair, James Hallmark, to call to order the June 3rd inaugural meeting of the Texas Transfer Advisory Committee. I have the privilege this morning of introducing the public university members of the Texas Transfer Advisory Committee. I'll probably say TTAC from here on out because that's a mouthful. Members, we will begin with the roll call to ensure that we have a quorum. When I call your name, please respond to confirm that you are on the call by simply saying here or present. This will also be a good opportunity for a little practice on hitting your mute and unmute button when you have something to say. So the first person that we have this morning is Cambra Balch, Associate Dean of Academic Programs for the University College at Texas State University.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. Courtney Gibson, Assistant Professor for Agriculture, Education, and Communications at Texas Tech University.
Present.
Shannon Goodman, Vice President for Enrollment at the University of North Texas.
Dr. Williamson, Shannon is unable to attend the meeting this morning. He sends his best wishes. Thanks.
Thank you. Ann Kennemer, Associate Provost for Undergraduate Studies at Texas A&M University.
Good morning, everybody.
Hi, Ann. Diane Lang, Professor of Music and Music Program Director of Field Experience at the University of Texas at Arlington.
Present.
Jennifer McDowell, University Registrar at the University of Texas at Dallas.
Present.
Michael Nojum, Professor and University Assessment Coordinator at Prairie View A&M University.
Present.
Todd Romero, Associate Professor of History and Associate Dean at the University of Houston.
Present.
David Ryden, Professor of History at the University of Houston, Downtown.
Present.
Heather Smith, Vice President for Academic Advising and Student Support at the University of Texas at El Paso.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. Timothy Ewan, Associate Professor of Interdisciplinary Learning and Teaching at the University of Texas at San Antonio.
Morning. Present.
And serving as ex officio members are Alvin Johnson, Director of Academic Advising at Prairie View A&M University. And we are honored to be joined by a dynamic individual who has recently experienced the transfer process as a student, Marisol Lucio, an undergraduate student at the University of North Texas at Dallas, herself a transfer student by way of Cedar Valley College and Mountain View College, respectively.
Present.
Thank you.
And present.
Thank you. And now I'd like to turn things over to my co-chair, James Hallmark, to introduce the members of the Texas Transfer Advisory Committee representing our community colleges. And thank you, everyone, for being here this morning. James?
Thank you, Laurel. The backgrounds are always kind of fun to see, and it looks like Tim is on a plane. Did anybody notice that? You're not really on a plane, right?
I wish, but
You wish. A very quiet flight, I guess, from background noise. But I do have the privilege of introducing the community college representatives on TTAC. And just as we did with the university representatives, we'd ask that you click on, say hello. That allows your image to come up on the screen and allow us to place the face with the name as we go through the names. Archie Blansom, president of Lone Star College, North Harris.
Present. Good to be here.
Thank you. Sylvia Flores, assistant professor of sociology at South Texas College.
Present.
Sylvia. Daylise Giorgio, department chair of mathematics at Dallas College.
present.
Fred Hills, vice president for instruction and student engagement at McLennan Community College.
Here.
As a point of personal privilege, I'll say Fred was a part of the working group. It was great working with you then, and look forward to working with you again on this one. Lana Hubbard, Dean of Arts and Sciences and Associate Professor of Psychology at Howard College.
Present.
Shane Kendall, Associate Professor and Chair of Natural Sciences at St. Philip's College.
Present.
Celinda Martinez, Associate Professor of Biology and Department Chair of Natural Sciences at Laredo College.
Present. Good morning.
Morning. Motamedi Mamouche, Associate Professor of Economics at Odessa College.
I'm here. Good morning.
Morning. Melinda Mejia, Program Coordinator and Faculty at Houston Community College.
Present.
Karen Morris, Program Coordinator for Education and College Success at Kilgore College.
Present.
Gaylyn Scott, Associate Vice President for Academic Programs at Austin Community College.
Good morning, present.
And serving as ex officio members are Gracie Martinez, Dean of Student Outreach and Enrollment Services at Del Mar College.
Present.
And Ann Franklin, a student majoring in computer science at Central Texas College.
Present.
Good to have all of you here. Please record in the minutes that we do have a quorum. And members, to ensure that we maintain a quorum, we want to ask that you keep your cameras on for the duration of the meeting. It's a way by which we maintain the records that we do have a quorum present. And now I'd like to ask Deputy Commissioner Ray Martinez to introduce the staff from the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board who will be assisting us in TTAC. And I'll tell you from our experience with the working group, their assistance is invaluable and you'll come to rely and appreciate their work. Ray, please take it away.
Thank you, James. Appreciate those comments, and thank you, Laurel. Appreciate your co-chair and leadership as well. Let me start by echoing Commissioner Keller's remarks this morning about how enthusiastic we are about the work ahead for TTAC. We're especially grateful for your willingness to serve our state and for your commitment to the task at hand, which of course is to improve vertical transfer pathways so that students who wish to transfer can more readily do so. I'm privileged to work each day with an outstanding group of higher education professionals here at the coordinating board. Our commitment is to provide you with the assistance that you will need to be able to execute your duties as members of this important advisory committee. And as you've seen in the agenda, we'll be talking about what the various responsibilities are for this committee and take a deeper dive into some of the issues as we move through the agenda. So now it's my pleasure to introduce coordinating board staff who will work closely with this advisory committee. And staff and colleagues, when I call your name, please also say that you're here in presence so that our TTAC colleagues can see who you are. So I want to start with someone well known, I think, to everybody across the state and on this call and highly regarded, and that is our Assistant Commissioner for Academic Affairs, Assistant Commissioner for Academic and Health Affairs, Dr. Stacy Silverman, who's been a very key part of both our work group process last year and in helping us to prepare for this first TTAC meeting and beyond. She and her staff will be staffing this advisory committee as we move forward. So Stacy, can you jump in real quick and say hello?
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. Great to see everyone.
Thank you, Stacy. So in addition to Stacy, we have 4 of her colleagues from the Division of Academic and Health Affairs. First, Reinhold Cornelius, who is Director of Research and Grants. Reinhold.
Hello and welcome.
Thank you. James Goman, Director of Graduate and Professional Studies. James.
Good morning. Nice to see you all.
Andrew Lofters, Program Director.
Good morning.
Thank you, Andrew. Audra Petridge, Program Director.
And Audra is out today, so
Thank you,
she is
Stacey.
on a much needed vacation.
Great. And Rebecca Leslie, also a Program Director.
Good morning.
Thank you, Rebecca. Also providing critical assistance to our to our agency transfer team is Marjorie Smith Barrett, who is our Assistant Commissioner for Communications. And Marjorie, I think you may be on the call. If you are, can you let us know? Okay, maybe Marjorie's not on just yet, but I think she'll join us at some point. And finally, to round out the staff introductions, I'm pleased to introduce 3 additional agency colleagues who, like Stacy, have been involved in this initiative since its inception, dating all the way back to when we started our work group process last year. And without these individuals, with Stacy and these additional individuals, we really would not be here today because they did a lot of heavy lifting and hard work over the past 12 months. Elizabeth Mayer, who's our agency's policy director. Elizabeth.
Good morning. Happy to see you all.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And you'll hear from Elizabeth a little bit later when we talk about data. Annie Jones, policy coordinator for the agency. Annie.
Hey, good morning, everyone.
Thank you, Annie. And Dakota Doman, senior director for strategy and policy. Dakota.
Good morning. It's great to see you all.
Thank you, Dakota. Colleagues, thank you in advance for your service and commitment to ensure the success of TTAC and our new Texas Transfer Framework. So it's now my pleasure, and I think she's on our call, to turn things over to our agency's general counsel, Nicole Bunker Henderson, who will provide us with an overview of the Texas Open Meetings Act and the Public Information Act. Nicole, it's all yours.
Great. Good morning, you all. Thank you, Ray. I know this is the least interesting part of your morning, so I'm just going to do a pretty quick drive-by on these issues. just for awareness purposes. So I think you all know that as an advisory committee, you all are going to be subject to the Open Meetings Act. There's training available on the Office of Attorney General website, which I think was shared with you. That training is optional for you, but it kind of gives you an understanding of a deeper understanding of the legal issues involving the Open Meetings Act. So for your purposes, just a few things that you need to know is that as a meeting under the Open Meetings Act, you all will need to maintain a quorum. So you have defined in your rules a quorum of your committee as being a majority of both the general academic representatives and also a majority of the two-year institution representatives. So if you lose a quorum at some point, then you will no longer be having a meeting of TTAC, you'll just be having a chat. So that's kind of the quorum requirements. Outside of the meeting, you should not have a quorum. So while you're in the meeting, you want a quorum. When you're outside of the meeting, you don't want a quorum. And that includes having electronic communications amongst each other that could total a majority of board members, of committee members here. You want to make sure that you don't have a walking quorum, which is it would be very difficult for you all to have a walking quorum because you're a very large body, but the walking quorum essentially happens when you engage in a series of communications by which you then cross the threshold over into a quorum. So that's just kind of a high level overview of the Open Meetings Act requirements. As carrying out functions as a governmental entity, you will be subject to the Public Information Act. That just means that if you're taking notes or you have other documents, they could be subject to disclosure. They may not be if there's an applicable exception. You just need to let either Ray or me know if you receive a request for information that includes any kind of notes or emails you might have taken while you're carrying this out. And that's essentially kind of the overview of things you need to know. Obviously, there's general ethics principles. You know, you don't want to engage in behavior that, you know, could be called into question in terms of your impartiality in carrying out your duties. But that's really kind of just the high level basics you need to know. And I would be happy to take any questions, but other than that, I just encourage you all to have fun.
I think we have a question, Nicole. Michael, go ahead. Sir.
What kind of majority for a quorum?
So in your in the rules for TTAC, it's a majority of the general academic members and then also majority of the junior college or two-year institution. So if you lose a majority of either sector, then you will have lost a quorum as defined in your rules.
Great.
I might add that that was intentional in terms of making sure that we had good representation from both constituencies. And if I could ask a clarification on the inadvertent quorum, I don't know what term you use, but I'll call it inadvertent quorum. So if say the community college folks or some portion of them decided to get together and talk about a particular idea, that would not be a quorum, because the university folks would not be part of it. And similarly, the university folks caucusing, if you will, to discuss, that would not meet the quorum.
That would not, yes, a quorum requires under your rules, both a majority of the general academic and the general junior call and the two-year institutions. So you have to have both. You know, I think you always want to just, you know, be a little bit cautious about that's an unusual quorum requirement that is in the rules. So there's probably not any court opinions about that, and we maybe don't want to test that, but generally that should be okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Nicole? I know she's going to have to move on to other meetings. Nicole, I think one of the issues that may come up later, we have an agenda item that just talks about our next meeting of TTAC, and I think there may be some questions about if we have an in-person meeting, are we allowed to still have a remote option for those that may not be able to join us in person? Is that going to be dependent upon other factors like, you know, emergency public health declarations or things like that? Is there anything you can any guidance at all you can give without knowing fully the answer, but anything you can say in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an issue I think we will need to look more deeply into, depending on the extent that these disaster proclamations continue. And then also there were a number of pieces of legislation this session that potentially impacted the implementation of the Open Meetings Act in-person requirements. So we probably want to do a deeper dive on that question. But yeah.
That's great. Great. Okay, any other questions or comments for Nicole? And before you leave, Nicole, I should have explained to the group as I was doing introductions that you too and your staff were critical during the period that we had to draft the rules that implemented both the TTAC and the new Texas transfer framework. So Nicole, thank you for your efforts during this entire process as well. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. And this is such an exciting effort. So it's really amazing to see this to come to life and for you all to get to work today. It's great.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, I think I've got the next item on the agenda, which I'm going to do pretty quickly because I think this information was in your packet. And Christina, maybe I can ask you, I think we might have, excuse me, I think we might have a couple of slides that represent the 8 charges that are officially listed as sort of the responsibilities of this important advisory committee. And so, Christina, if you can move to the slides that represent the charges, but this is in your packet, members. So if you have your packet nearby, the packet that we sent out, I'm trying to see if I can find the page number exactly.
I apologize. I didn't have that PowerPoint pulled up. Give me a second and let me pull that.
Okay, thank you, Christina. While Christina is pulling that up, I'm looking at the charges. We didn't put page numbers on each of the pages, but if you scroll down, it looks like the charges are on page 12 of the packet that we sent out to all of the TTAC members. And I'm just going to, what I will do, I think folks have, I'm seeing thumbs up that folks have that in front of them. While Christina's pulling up these PowerPoint slides, but again, it's just going to be on slides, the 8 charges. So let me talk about each one. And as Michael did, or just jump in, either raise your hand electronically or just jump in if you have any questions or comments as we talk about the 8 charges that are given to TTAC. The first, of course, is oversight of field of study curricula, review of relevant data, coordination of the schedule of discipline-specific reviews, and recommended discipline-specific curricula. Thank you so much, Christina. That's great. And so, again, we're going to talk further as we move into the agenda about some of these specific responsibilities. But again, feel free if you want to jump in at any point to do so. And if I don't see your hand raised while I'm talking, just jump right in if you need to. The second is recommendations for field of study curricula to be approved by the commissioner, including recommendations for core curriculum courses relevant to a specific discipline and courses for the Discipline Foundation courses and the directed elective components. Again, we're going to talk in greater detail about what exactly comprises what we call the DFC, the Discipline Foundation courses, and what exactly are directed electives. So we'll go into a deeper dive as we get into our agenda about those specific terms. Third is review and make recommendations to the commissioner to optimize the transferability and applicability of credits and increase transfer student success within majors. A broad portfolio, if you will, of overall transfer policy that you all have in making recommendations directly to the commissioner. Fourth, to develop and coordinate legacy field of study curricula. And what that means is the current field of study curricula that are in place. There are currently articulated, I believe, 16 field of study curricula on a variety of disciplines. So your fourth charge is to develop and coordinate a review of the current field of study curricula or legacy field of study curricula, and a schedule for discipline-specific subcommittees to do their work based on various factors, reasonable factors, including prioritizing development of frameworks in high enrollment and high need disciplines. So we're going to try our very best to give you, in fact, we do so in your packet today, data on existing field of study curricula, utilization rates, and for you all to utilize that data to make informed decisions about whether to proceed and how to proceed with the formation of discipline-specific subcommittees. And a little bit later in the agenda, your co-chairs will talk in greater detail about these discipline-specific subcommittees. Fifth is to convene and review the work of the discipline-specific subcommittees in accordance with the established field of study curricula review schedule. So you all can decide, you can take a look at the 16 currently in place field of study curricula and decide here's the order we want to take them in to try to review the current field of study into the new Texas transfer framework. Again, that's within the authority of this advisory committee to put a schedule in place if you'd like to do so, however you want to do it, and then sort of follow the work of these discipline-specific subcommittees. They will be reporting up to you once you form these subcommittees. 6 is to monitor curricular changes at general academic teaching institutions and student course enrollment patterns within and across our community colleges. 7th, develop the Discipline Foundation courses component of the field of study curriculum with consideration for the most frequently used transfer pathways. And then finally, recommendations regarding the timing and structure of transfer policy related agency surveys and data collection from institutions of higher education, and of course, timely and appropriate dissemination of information to help inform institutional decisions about curriculum and program design. So there may be some data elements that you all think needs to be captured or captured in a different way. We want to be informed if you think so that we can talk to the commissioner and consider whether data elements need to be added to what we already collect on transfer across the state. Those are the 8 charges. All of them obviously are important, and they are articulated in the rules that have been promulgated and adopted by the board of this agency. I would say in particular charges 1 through 4 are particularly critical and sort of comprise the heart of the work of this important new advisory committee. And I think I've already talked a little bit about how we're going to the work that you all will do to take a look at existing field of study curricula and decide how to proceed in moving those into the new, whether they even should be moved into this new Texas transfer framework. So that concludes the overview of the 8 charges. And I'm happy, thank you, Christina. I'm happy to take any questions or comments, and Stacy is available as well. Our full team is available to talk about any of these responsibilities for TTAC if you all want to expand on these further. And again, just know that we're going to take a deeper dive into some of these terms as we move into the agenda. So let me stop there and see if anybody has any comments or questions about these charges. Okay, great. All right. So it's my pleasure now to turn things over to Dr. Stacy Silverman. And Stacy's going to provide an overview of the implementation of Senate Bill 25. I think probably most of you are familiar with SB 25. It was, the commissioner referenced it in his opening remarks. It was passed and signed into law back in 2019 and provides important new requirements to improve transfer across the state. And Stacy will go into greater detail with her presentation. Stacy, it is all yours.
Thank you, Ray. And again, good morning, everyone. I'm so pleased that you are all here, and I'm so excited about the important work ahead. Next slide, please. So Senate Bill 25 was passed by the Texas legislature in 2019, and it focused on transfer. Specifically, this legislation made some important changes to facilitate transfer, foster academic progress, and improve timely graduation of students in higher education. Next slide, please. A quick update on SB 25 provisions that have already been completed include adding a question to the Apply Texas application, which allows an institution to share a student's application with other institutions that offer that same program if the student was not admitted to the initial institution's specific degree program. Additionally, students are now filing degree plans earlier For the first-time freshman students, they file their degree plans when they complete 30 semester credit hours. And for dual credit students, they now file a degree plan upon completion of 15 semester credit hours. The committee that helped develop the study on core curriculum meta majors met in fall 2020, and the report was submitted to the legislature in November. It's also posted and available on the coordinating board's website. The report on non-transferable credit was completed and submitted to the legislature on March 1st. I'll provide some additional information about the findings included in that report on some of the following slides. Next slide, please. Additional provisions of SB 25 codified the establishment of articulation agreements between public universities and community colleges, allow for data sharing from high schools to post-secondary institutions, and provided funding for some specific dual credit courses. Next slide, please. One provision that is underway is the implementation of institutional reporting of recommended course sequencing. The negotiated rulemaking committee met in early March and reached a consensus on the proposed rules, including a template and reporting timelines. The proposed rules were published in the Texas Register on May 7th, and the public comment period ends on Saturday, June 5th. The proposed rules are on track to go to the board at its July 22nd meeting, and institutions will begin reporting in the fall. An informational webinar was held on May 3rd, and another is scheduled for June 22nd. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, I had some additional information about the report on non-transferable credit. The report provided an analysis of lower division courses for which students were not granted transfer credit at their receiving public university. The report also includes an analysis of community college courses taken by students who earned an associate degree or had transferred from a two-year institution to a public university. Of note, most courses taken by this group of community college students were from the lower division academic course guide manual, or ACGM. So they were courses that potentially could be transferred. Next slide, please. On this slide are the 5 reasons that institutions could choose from to report why credits were not granted. This information is reported for all first-time transfers to the 4-year institution that are coming from a community college. Next slide, please. So this table shows the breakdown of the reported reasons for dual credit denial in fall 2020. In total, there were more than 69,000 courses reported that were denied credit for students transferring to 4-year institutions. These courses were taken by about 17,000 students, so the average number of denied courses per student in this data collection was 4. The most frequently cited reason for a course not transferring was that the student did not meet the grade requirements necessary to receive credit, with 46% of all denied courses falling into this category. Next slide, please. So this graph shows 2 things. The top most frequently denied courses for transfer students in fall 2020, and the reasons why they were denied credit. The most frequently denied course was Math 1314 or College Algebra, followed by Composition 1, US History 1, Composition 2, and Learning Frameworks. As is true of the overall pattern for all courses that we saw on the previous slide, most of the courses were denied credit because their grade did not meet the minimum requirement, as shown in the dark blue bars. Interesting, EDUC 1300 or Learning Frameworks was the exception to this pattern. So the report on non-transferable credit provides a snapshot into the transfer landscape through the lens of course taking. However, this new data collection on the CBM OOT will allow for the creation of a rich longitudinal database that will help us tell a more complete story about the transfer experience. Ultimately, we will be able to link the information for these denied credits with the actual student and course taking information from their time at a community college prior to transfer. We're excited about the insights we can gain from these data as we continue to improve the data collection and analysis for this report moving forward. Also on this call this morning is Christina Zavala, our colleague from our data group and the person responsible for ensuring that these data are correct. I just wanted to acknowledge her and thank her for her great work in this area. Next slide, please. So that concludes my overview of the status of the provisions in SB 25, and I'm happy to address any questions.
Hi, this is David Ryden from UH Downtown. I have a question.
Sure.
When students said that it didn't fit within their major, was it, did the, I guess, receiving institution accept the credit but didn't apply it to the major area? Or was the credit thrown into unused area, you know, above the 120 hours? Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure, that's a great question. I do think, you know, institutions are very good about trying to apply the course, whether it's as an elective, if possible. But again, there are those times where students exceed that 120 semester credit hour limit, you know, because they transfer with excess hours.
Let me add something to that. David, the way you said that, I want to seek clarification. I believe you said the student, and I believe it isn't the student that's designating this as whatever category, but rather the institution is designated in that CBM OOT. Is that correct, Stacy?
That is correct, yes.
So the institution in some way in its database is flagging this particular course in a particular way, and then that is what is reported to the coordinating board as opposed to student survey.
This is Canberra Balch from Texas State. Stacy, may I ask a question also?
Absolutely.
So along with David's question, one of the things that we know from the data that we submitted in the CBM OOT is that we were advised to say if the course did not apply to the major requirement, even though the language in the language was interchangeable between degree and major. And so my thought in looking at this data as we proceed is it would be really good when we ferreted out more data from our institution, we could see, for example, that EDUC, when it's core coded, would apply to the students' core curriculum requirements, even though it was on this report, as not applying to the student's major. So as we as a committee work, would it be possible for us to work with that data just a little bit more, massage the data so we could see how those courses actually apply, or if they did not at all?
So absolutely, we're happy to share data with this group and also to remind everyone that the first data collection year is always a little bumpy. So we'll certainly be refining that as we move forward.
Good morning.
I'm happy to, oh, yes, go ahead.
It's a different question. Is that fine right now? Okay. It's Felice Giorgio from Dallas College. And the information where it says did not meet minimum grade requirement, what was that deciding line that gave those results?
So that likely was varied by institution and varied by course and program. So some institutions actually take a course that a student earned a grade of D in, while others do not.
And as you noted, some degree programs the student is going into may accept a D or a C, whereas another one would not accept a D or C in that specific course.
Right, and moving forward, as Stacy mentioned, we are working on clarifying the language that is currently on the manual for institutions to use to be able to determine which courses fall under each category. And one of that being that we know that a lot of institutions reported D's and F's. And so, you know, part of the reason why there are I believe it was 69,000 courses, were because all of the instances that a student might have taken a course and failed it at a community college may have been listed each time by the university. And so certainly that's reason for some of the inflated numbers that we see there. But we are working on clarifying that language to help institutions better categorize the various courses that did not receive credit at the 4-year level.
I have a question, Stacy. What is a repeated course? Finally, Fred Hills, MCC.
Sure. So that is when a student may have, not gotten the grade they wanted to get, and then they took it again to see if they could get a better grade. I believe that happens a lot in college algebra, along with some other math courses. And especially that's important when there are prerequisites to enter a specific degree program. And I'll defer to Christina to add anything else.
No, I'll say that one of the other areas of confusion was I think the challenge between institutions not knowing when, so for example, there might be a course that wasn't accepted because it did not meet the minimum grade requirement, but it was also a repeated course. And so, everyone sort of had their own interpretation of perhaps a hierarchy of how they went about categorizing that course. So that's also another area that we know is a challenge for institutions. And again, that sort of varied across institutions. I think that the variation that we have seen within the data, but then also conversations that we've had across university systems, I think is just showed that there were a lot of areas of interpretation for everyone submitting the data.
So in the case of, say, college algebra, a student took it 2 times to get a better grade, but still didn't get in the system? I'm confused, or one of the courses didn't apply because it was a repeat. Is that what you're saying here?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to add, this is Laurel, that we knew there were some things in the data, as Christina has pointed out, that were sort of obscured why we were collecting the data, which was we were trying to pinpoint really what courses didn't transfer from institution to institution. And again, as Stacy pointed out, that first reporting is always confusing, a bumpy ride. And we didn't expect that Fs would be in there, for example, because we don't expect at the community colleges that university would accept an F for credit, right? But the reporting system needs refinement and clarity. And again, just keep your eye on what we're trying to find out by collecting this data, which is what courses that a student took and made a passing grade didn't transfer that applied to a program or to the degree. And once we refine that and get those reasons, then we can look specifically at those courses and make some general assessments about what's going on there. But right now, I think the system of collection has to be refined further before we can make any assumptions about what it's trying to tell us.
Absolutely, Laurel. And one of the things that I'll say is that we're meeting now to talk about what clarifications can be made in the instructions. And, for this next reporting period, it will be the same as the first time around. And so the changes that will be made in terms of language and providing further guidance and parameters will take place in 2022. That's when we'll start seeing the changes being made to the language there. So we anticipate that this time around with our second collection that will span
Unless it's just me, I think we might have just lost Christina.
Okay.
So we'll get her back as soon as we can.
Good strategy.
This is Marnoush. May I ask you a question about this not meeting their grade requirement? It means that they should be failed. I'm talking about the community colleges. They take the mass credit here. They should be failed, or they may get C here, but they want to go to UT Austin. But UT Austin can say that I don't accept C, I just want B. Which one of these two are? Both? Just one?
So I think you raise an excellent point, and that's a reporting issue that we will be tackling as we move forward. So you're absolutely right. There could be more than one reason for a course not to transfer. And how do you capture that in the data without overinflating that instance? Yeah.
And we also know that there may be instances, and I think this is what Marmoush may be trying to get at, where an institution will accept the grade of a D, but perhaps not in a program within the university. So if the student is perhaps a STEM major and is going to major in mathematics, they won't accept a D in college algebra. But if you're a communications major, they may accept a D in college algebra. So sometimes it depends upon the transfer track and the program. And those are the kinds of refinements that we need to have in this data, again, so that we can clearly understand what we want to know about what's not transferring in a reasonable way, right? And articulate that, and then begin to look into those issues more specifically. And it will probably take 3 iterations of collection before we can do that. And so, I would just say, don't get a little too wrapped around the axle until we can refine that data in a way that gives us clarity so that we can make assumptions.
So great. Any other questions for me?
Just a quick follow-up. Hi, sorry. Oops. If I may, on the college algebra, for example, if a student doesn't do well and repeats the course, and passes it, is it held against them for repeating the course?
So that would be, in terms of the reporting, it would be an institutional. That's why I think institutions need some greater direction on how to actually handle that situation.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Other questions?
I have a quick question. This is Celinda Martinez from Laredo College. Hi. The question that I have, do we know how many of those students graduated with an associate's degree and transferred, or did not complete the associate's degree but transferred those courses anyway without meeting that grade requirement?
And for that, I'm going to call on Christina. She would certainly be our data expert on this area.
Celinda, we actually did not look into that, but that is something that could be worthwhile. I'm the one primarily in charge of analyzing the data, and I'm also on this committee, so I definitely can look into doing that. So I'll say that that the non-transferable credit portion does not, but the other report that Stacy referenced was about the coursework that students at 2 years take, and that is broken down by those who received an associate, those who transferred, and those who both received an associate and transferred.
Perfect, thank you.
Sorry, this is me again. I have one more question about this grade requirement. I'm kind of confused that why, from the point of data point, why we even consider the credit that the student take but couldn't pass in our data? Of course, they cannot transfer it if they have F, right? Why we do not have a subsample of past courses? Maybe I don't know.
So I think that's an excellent point, and I think that's something that will be refined as the data collection effort moves forward. So
yeah, I'll just add that that is something that we've been talking about, that we noticed that institutions were reporting D's and F's, and of course there hadn't been any guidance on that, and given that it was the first sort of collection, I think we weren't really sure what to expect, and so now we sort of understand the different grades that are coming in. And so one of the things that we will likely clarify in the future is that we're really interested in understanding what are the courses that students at the 2-year level received credit for, but are not receiving credit for when they transfer to 4-year universities. So we absolutely understand that we need to provide some further clarification there, because that is the exact point that we are trying to analyze and to get some further clarity on.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And if I may add, I know that someone mentioned distinguishing between people who have completed their associates and those who have not. One additional thing you may want to distinguish are those who transfer core complete, because that also will give a different outcome of what a university accepts versus transferring before your core complete.
This is
Very
Gracie.
good point.
This is Gracie from Del Mar College. Do we look at the students that maybe have graduated from a community college at 1 degree, but yet they are transferring to a university with a totally different degree, and then that's going to have some of those courses that apply to outside that new degree plan?
Yeah. So absolutely, I think you're hitting on an important point that we'll be considering as we move into our agenda, as it relates to students change their majors, and we recognize that, we realize that. Our effort here is to really foster a pathway so that students have a clear understanding of what the road looks like in their educational pursuit. So, but I appreciate everyone's comments on this, and I don't want to let the day get away from us. So unless there are other burning questions. So it's now my pleasure to turn things back over to our TTAC co-chairs, Laurel Williamson and James Hallmark, who will provide a brief overview of the new Texas transfer framework. James?
Thank you, Stacy. And I think we all appreciate the conversation that we just had. And I particularly will praise you for speaking out, asking these questions. And obviously, there's a lot of things that we are still trying to figure out, the coordinating board's seeking to figure out on that particular report. But the reason I want to point it out now is this is the kind of conversations we need to have in order to be successful as a TTAC. And it's not always easy when you're online to be able to have that kind of interaction, develop those relationships, speak honestly. But it's the kind of thing that will be important as we move forward over the coming weeks, months, and years, working together in improving transfer in Texas. This is important to all of us. Improving transfer is important to all of us. If it wasn't, you wouldn't be on the screen right now. And it certainly is important for the commissioner. And shortly after he became commissioner in October of 2019, he had a conversation with several people, and I was one, but one-on-one kinds of conversations about what do we need to do in order to improve transfer. And two of the individuals he talked to were me and Jacob Frere, with the CEO of the Texas Association of Community Colleges. And we began discussing how we might be able to partner universities, community colleges in developing and improving a transfer framework. So in April of last year, at the request of the commissioner, Jacob and I convened a small group of individuals. There were a total of 10 of us There were 5 from the community college world and 5 from the university world. And then, I don't know, 30 or 40 coordinating board staff. It seemed like there were a bunch of y'all supporting our work, but certainly a large contingent of coordinating board staff helping us through that process. And we met for quite a bit of weeks. And it was a group that eventually became called the Improving Transfer in Texas Work Group. And in addition to my co-chair, Laura Williamson, there are several of our colleagues that are on this advisory committee that were also on the Improving Transfer in Texas Work Group, and that includes Fred Hills from McLennan College, Shannon Goodman from University of North Texas, and Ann Kinnemer from Texas A&M University. So this group worked together for several months, and as Stacy has just explained, SB 25, which became law in 2019, included several important provisions to improve transfer in Texas, most notably that requirement for institutions to implement a recommended course sequence for every certificate and degree program, filing of degree plans, and that new reporting requirement on non-transferable credit that we just discussed a good bit. As a starting point, the Improving Transfer in Texas Work Group believed that it was important to build on that momentum from SB 25. So the work group, which met weekly for 90-minute Zoom calls, focused initially on learning about what other states have done and implemented successful transfer initiatives. For example, we met virtually with representatives from California to learn about their associate degree in transfer, and with officials from Georgia to hear about their Nexus transfer degree program. We met with SUNY, we met with Washington, we met with several different states in order to get a better sense of how others might be tackling this challenge. And our intent was to hear about their lessons learned in those states so that we could apply those to our experiences here in Texas. And I'm going to turn it over to Laurel at this time, and she's going to describe the general design principles that were established in that work group that guided the eventual development of the TTAC framework. Laurel?
Thanks, James. After we heard from several states about their transfer systems, we realized that we had some important elements already in place. And so we began to agree upon design principles that would eventually shape our Texas transfer framework. The design principles were as follows. Let's see. Principle 1 was shared responsibility. Both community colleges and universities would share equally the responsibility for an efficient transfer framework. Principle 2, transparency and student-centric academic pathways. The transfer framework would be seamless and transparent for students. Principle 3, optimizing courses that applied upon transfer. The transfer framework would optimize the number of courses or credits applicable to the major upon transfer to the university. Principle 4 was process. The transfer framework shall be developed through a transparent process that involves institutions participating in a formal venue to identify and endorse mechanisms for efficient transfer. And principle 5, full-scale implementation. The mechanisms of the transfer framework must be adhered to by all institutions, and a formal venue would be sustained for post-implementation oversight. And that was incredibly important to us. The work group held its final meeting in late October of last year with the consensus reached by all 10 members on the general elements and principles of the new Texas transfer framework, which was specifically focused upon improving the current field of study curriculum. I'm going to now turn things back over to James to continue this overview and get into a little more detail.
Good. Thank you, Laurel. And so we met for several months, over 25 of those meetings, and reached consensus on what were the essential elements of what is the Texas transfer framework. And then we turned it over to the coordinating board staff to develop the rules that would implement the framework. So last January, the coordinating board staff submitted the proposed rules to the Texas Register, and after the comments were received and considered, revisions made, the final rules implementing the new Texas transfer framework were adopted at the March 12, 2021 coordinating board meeting. So along with Laurel, we're going to go through the detailed overview of the Texas framework, and it begins on slide 2, which has been popping up on your screen there for a little bit. As this slide shows, the Texas framework consists of 60 semester credit hours of lower division courses that a student must complete to earn an associate degree for transfer. And the framework aims to optimize the course selections made by students with the intent that the students who complete 60 SCH will transfer to universities with junior standing in their major, and that as many courses as possible will apply to their selected degree program. The Texas core curriculum consists of 42 hours of the semester credit hours, organized in 9 component areas and broad disciplinary areas. The intent of the discipline-specific Texas core curriculum element of this aspect of the new Texas transfer framework is to identify courses in relevant component areas that would satisfy both the student's Texas core curriculum requirement and apply to the student's degree program upon transfer. Note that the number of Texas core curriculum course hours for each major course of study will be determined by the discipline-specific subcommittee and will include only courses relevant for that major. Everybody confused by now? You'll get comfortable with it. In terms of that discipline's foundation courses, that middle box, these courses will be comprised of up to 12 semester credit hours of major specific courses prescribed for students by the discipline-specific subcommittee. Credit completed in the discipline foundation courses will apply upon transfer to any public university in the state that offers a corresponding degree program. Credit will be transcribed by the sending institution as completing a requirement in the DFC, Discipline Foundation courses. All DFC courses must be cross-listed using the Texas Common Course numbering system, especially in student-facing materials. We want to make sure students see that TCCS number. And only courses in the Academic Course Guide Manual, ACGM, are eligible for inclusion. Courses typically taught at the upper division at university should not be included in the DFC. And a course should only be included in the DFC if a critical number of community colleges have the capacity to offer the course. The Texas Transfer Advisory Committee will ensure that DFC is comprehensively reviewed no less than once every 5 years, and it could be reviewed earlier, including upon institutional request, for example, in the case of accreditation changes or some other reason. The review will include evaluation of data related to student completion of the DFC, applicability of transferred courses to the major of the DFC following transfer, and student success in subsequent courses and in completing majors. I'm going to send it back to Laurel now for an explanation of the directed electives.
Okay. As James said, at first when you go through this, it seems unfamiliar, a little confusing, but hang on. And I would also say, someone brought up earlier a question about students who changed their majors. Though that is something that we will eventually talk about, this is not designed for a student who's going to change majors. This is a path that a student would pick and stay on that path, and then that transfer would be seamless. A change in major brings in a different conversation. So I would just caution you not to go down the road about the changing majors yet. This is a transfer pathway that would be consistent for the student. So each discipline-specific transfer framework will include at least 6 credit hours of courses that address an individual student's interests and needs. The general academic institution may submit to the coordinating board a set of specific directed elective courses that are either recommended or required by the institution to ensure student success in subsequent courses. Students take courses used to fulfill this requirement based on the student's academic interest and the university in which they intend to transfer. Only courses in the ACGM are eligible for inclusion. And I think that you can see, and you will come to understand as we go forward, that we wanted this very tightly done, again, so that the transfer would be seamless, that students would understand how to take courses, what the sequence of courses will be, what the requirements will be upon transfer to the university. Any courses identified by individual institutions for use toward this requirement must be cross-listed using the Texas Common Core numbering system, especially in those student-facing materials. And again, as we go forward, I would ask that you keep the student at the center of your thinking as we put these pieces together and talk about them. Prospective transfer students will be supplied with appropriate advising materials to help them make choices that maximize the likelihood of courses in this category transferring to a degree program and applying to a major based on their transfer preferences, so that their core curriculum, their discipline foundation courses, their directed electives, again, all line up seamlessly for that transfer piece. Let's go to slide 3 now. The next slide is just a representation of what James and I have described so far. You'll see on this slide that the innermost box in red represents the core curriculum. That's 42 credit hours, followed by the next box, the yellow, which is the discipline foundation courses. And those are, again, major specific courses that go beyond the core, but are guaranteed to transfer because they're specified for that particular major. And then finally, the box to the far left in dark blue show the directed electives. And again, those may be specified by the receiving institution, recommended or required. So if I'm a business major, I know if I'm transferring to a specific institution that they are recommending or requiring these electives that will apply to my major path. So I'll be ready and everything will transfer seamlessly. Next slide, please. So these are, you'll see on slide 4, this is about determining when a student is field of study complete. A student is considered field of study complete when entering with all 3 of the above blocks complete, which means that the receiving institutions must block substitute all field of study courses for all major specific lower division requirements. Students may be required to take additional non-major lower division courses even after transfer. A student is field of study incomplete when entering with partial completion of any of the above blocks, those 3 chunks, which means that receiving institutions must substitute any completed field of study courses for major applicable courses, but may require additional lower division coursework in the major. Slide 5. And lastly, you can see from this slide, in addition to the definition of directed electives, this slide explains that on rare occasions, a general academic teaching institution may have a unique major that for a variety of reasons may not fit into a field of study curriculum that is articulated by a discipline-specific subcommittee. If this occurs, and we anticipate that this would be utilized very rarely, an institution can petition this committee, TTAC, for an alternative DFC, which for this first meeting, we're not going to really go into detail here because these are the exceptions, and we're hoping they're very few, but it's set forth in Rule 4.35, and we will cover this again later in our next meeting, which I believe occurs in August. I'm going to pause here along with staff, and we would like to see if there are any questions. And again, if it's a little confusing, it's because it's unfamiliar right now, but we want to take questions and comments that you may have at this time about this new Texas transfer framework. And knowing that we're going to have time together to really get into detail and explain all of these pieces. I just remind you that the informal transfer work group, we had months and weekly meetings to come to an understanding and clarity around that. So we'll open it up for questions now.
I have a question regarding the 6 semester credit hours in the directed electives. It says at least 6 semester credit hours that must be recommended or required by receiving institutions. So that's really putting a lot of decision-making with advising and the student with regards to identifying the receiving institution that the student wants to go to, make sure that those hours are transferable. And you know how many of the students are sort of undecided, so where they're going to end up. And I think that makes it more laser focused for that component, the advising with the student, to become really, really focused on finding out, you know, where do they want to transfer, so that we can guide them to the, you know, to take the correct courses. Just an observation there.
That is absolutely correct. And I like your term laser focus on that, because we do want to encourage, by the very structure itself, that our students make these decisions. And they make these decisions ahead of time. And so if I'm a student who wants to take a degree in business and I'm looking at what I need to do, I say I want to go to the University of Texas, then I know what those 6 hours need to be for that program at UT. If I'm a student and say, no, I want to go to A&M, or I want to go to the University of Houston, I want to major in business, I know what the University of Houston expects for those 6 hours. So those decisions can be made beforehand. And that's why we want to encourage that decision-making among students. I think the very framework itself is sort of a teaching moment for students to understand how best to transfer and how best to take advantage of all the credits that they do at a community college, so that when they get to the university, they're ready to be in junior standing, they're ready to get into their major, and they move quickly toward that bachelor's degree.
Laurel, I'll jump in real quick. I know we have Alvin as a question, but before we call on you, I will also say, you know, for James and Laurel certainly, and the other members of this advisory committee who are on the work group, you'll recall we had extensive conversations throughout the work group process about the important role that will also be played by this agency, because what we're going to ask is that the receiving institutions, the general academic teaching institutions, will have to apprise us, will have to let us know, here are the directed electives that we have put in place for this particular articulated field or discipline foundation, set of discipline foundation courses, because your subcommittees will articulate the DFC, which could include some core courses plus up to 12 hours of major specific courses, as Laurel explained. But then it's up to the four-year institutions to tell us, once they know, here are the courses that have been articulated for this particular major, here are the directed electives that we are assigning for that particular discipline. And they need to let the there's an obligation to let the coordinating board know, and then an obligation upon us at the coordinating board to highlight, to amplify that, and to make sure that community colleges and advisors at our community colleges are fully familiar with the full articulation for that particular major, the core plus DFC plus directed electives, so that that information can get to students so that they can know what that pathway is. So there was a lot of discussion about that amongst the work group, and a lot of moving parts here, but a strong obligation and commitment on the part certainly of this agency to make sure that we do our part to get that information out as quickly as possible.
And you can see, I think, how this improves the advising process for community college students, and why it's so important that these details are in those student-facing materials, so that a student can go online and look at, here's what I would need to do if I were to choose this institution, this major, and moving forward. Again, keep the student at the center of your thinking, and clarity for the student as he or she moves forward.
And this is Alvin, and mine was more of a comment and less of a question, but it goes to what, and I apologize, Thils, if I mispronounce your name. But he mentioned the challenge of advising in students. And Laurel, I know you didn't mean to do this, but you named the most competitive business schools, all three of those. And that becomes a challenge for students when they're planning in advance and they have all the intention of being accepted in those programs. But now I've chosen these directives, they're the most competitive. But now I have to choose a second option, but I didn't prepare for that institution. Just things to keep in mind when they have their eye on schools and they're not fully cognizant of the challenge of getting into some of those programs as a transfer student.
I have a question about FOSC complete and incomplete, because in our community college, we have a large group of our students who we call them general study, but mostly they are undecided. So they go and just they want to take 42 credits, and then they go to university making decision over there. We are working on adding some field, I don't want to call it minor, field to general study. Like if you're in general study, but your focus is in psychology or so on. But are we gonna have a different reporting data for these groups, incomplete and complete, based on FOSC?
Well, a subset of your students will be field of study complete. And in the case of, let's say, business, they've completed the curriculum for the core curriculum and for the DFC, and they've completed the 6 hours from their receiving institution. They are complete. But you will have many, many other students who are not complete, either because they're in a discipline where we do not have a pathway such as this, or they are in, well, I guess that would describe everybody else who's in that category, but it certainly would capture those who are in your general studies who are not pursuing a specific degree program at the community college, or pursuing a specific bachelor's degree destination from the community college. I think that's a fair statement. I get that right, Laurel? Yeah.
Yes, and again, I think that one of the things that community colleges may learn to focus on is encouraging students again to make decisions early, so that they can ensure that they take the right courses, and that they will be set upon transfer. That's all to the good for the student. But again, students make decisions late and early and in between.
I'm going to jump back in and make one quick comment. And David, I see you raising your hand, so we'll get to you momentarily. Something that Alvin raised a while ago about there may be different sets of directed electives from the receiving institutions. That certainly is possible. One thing that we may want to think about that you all, since you all have the authority to form the discipline-specific subcommittees, and again, there's a whole presentation on that that's coming up in our agenda, so you'll learn more about these subcommittees. But it may be that this advisory committee wants to encourage your discipline-specific subcommittees to articulate what they would recommend as a set of directed electives for a particular major. Again, it's not going to be an obligation for the receiving institution to take that recommendation, but it could be a good template so that we don't have a lot of differentiation for those up to 6 hours of directed electives from the receiving institution. So that's something to think about as we go through the discipline-specific subcommittee process, that they might be able to recommend. Here would be a set of directed electives that receiving institutions might want to consider for this particular articulated DFC. And David, I think I saw you raising your answer.
I apologize if I missed the plot. I think this was on slide number 4 or 62 in the actual manual or the report. I guess what I lost the plot as to what is the discipline foundation courses basically going to be the same thing as the field of studies, or approximate it, or will there be absolute overlap between the two, or am I just way off base and I need to go home and study some more?
Yes.
Oh, I need to study it some more.
Study more? No. I mean, we still have, so we're going to be transitioning from the existing field of study process to this new framework.
Okay.
But it's still field of study.
So that's codified in law, that term, field of study, and it's going to be with us. Right. But we're going to start. Okay. I apologize.
The transfer framework is field of study with some parameters around it. That's my language, not a
okay. So I guess where I is the directive electives, could they potentially be in the field of study? It sounds like some of the core obviously will be. So I'm going to just use an example. So psychology, I don't know, 1301, 2317. I think in some schools, both those courses are in the core. that fits in obviously as part of the Discipline Foundation courses. But then you might have something like child psychology, I think might be in there. That would be in the directed electives portion of this.
Sure.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
this framework is not in addition to field of study. This framework is field of study, but it is got a new framework to it that we believe is new and improved over the previous framework.
Yeah, I think that's worth amplifying just real quick, David. You know, you're right. Field of study is a statutory term, and that did not go away. That's still in the education code. So field of study would, as we would look at it for purposes of this new transfer framework, would be core plus DFC plus directed electives, those three elements. And there may be some disciplines or some majors that don't have any core courses that are articulated in the DFC. So it's DFC plus directed electives equals field of study for that particular major. But typically the way we're looking at it is those three boxes, some core courses plus DFC, which are major specific, plus directed electives, that comprises field of study for purposes of the education code. Yes, sir.
Now, I think if you think of it that that the 60 credits within the associate degree reflect essentially what a native university student would take as their 60 credits within the first 2 years, so that there is replication there, so that the community college transfer student arrives at that junior status in the same way that a native student might do. You know, and we know there will be some variation there with student choices and interest. But again, the point is to have that seamless transfer. And we talked a great deal about the fields of study and recognized that there was a lot of work that had gone on with those fields of study, but there were some flaws there and some questions and some lack of full comfort with the field of study. And those are the things that we hope to address through TTAC.
May I ask another question here? With the field of study, I understand that does this include under the new transfer framework, anything with the field of study for mathematics that was put on pause by the coordinating board? Is it, I don't know if it's the right time to bring that piece up, but because of my area, I'm a little concerned about some of the questions we get from students right now regarding the field of study in mathematics.
Sure, and it's always the right time to ask a question, so absolutely. And I'm going to invite maybe my colleague Stacy to jump into this one with me. For any of the currently in place, articulated, whatever the right word would be, for any of the current field of study curricula, those remain in place. And the way the rules were written was to ensure that any of the current field of study curricula that are in place, and you can go to the agency's website and see what they are, and then click on those and see exactly what the courses are that were previously done by advisory committees that were previously assembled. All of those remain in place, and we put in to the rules that comprise the new transfer framework a generous amount of time for each of the current field of study to be able to stay in place for a number of years to allow this committee to decide what is the timing. So there were some field of study curricula that were paused last July by our board in anticipation of the work that was happening at the time by the work group that we've talked about. That's why they were paused. So what to do about those and the timing for all of the currently in place, currently articulated field of study curricula is up to this committee. You all get to decide what to move forward and what the timing is and so forth. But we tried to write the rules in a way that allowed you a generous amount of time so that you don't have to make that decision right away. There may be some of our, again, sort of legacy or currently in place field of study curricula that you feel ought to stay in place for a longer period of time. As an advisory committee, you all can choose to do that if you want to. So I hope that's helpful. Stacy, would you like to jump into any aspect of that?
So I agree with you, Ray. the rules did expressly address the existing field of study, and it is this group that is going to help us work through that transition. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but I know you are all up to the task. Great job, Ray.
Other questions or comments as we talk about the framework?
Yes, this is Jennifer McDowell from UTD. I have a question for slide 63 in regards to the directed electives, at least 6 SEH. It says the directed electives will be submitted to the coordinating board by each receiving institution and must include lower division courses for the ACGM academic course guide manual. Can you point to me the administrative rule directing this? And then also, I have not been aware of any format that this is going to with the coordinating board.
Yeah, Stacy or Elizabeth Mayer, I would invite either one of you into this. I don't have the rules in front of me, Jennifer. I think that's we can certainly find that for you and make sure that we get that in front of us and maybe put it into the chat or something of this meeting so that you all can see it. And in terms of the format, you're right to let our agency know about what the directed electives are. We are still working through how we're going to make that happen, Jennifer. So there's not, to the best of my knowledge, unless Stacy's way ahead of me, a template that we've put in place yet, but it's something that we're talking about. Stacy, would you like to correct anything that I just said?
Nope, you were spot on. That was perfect.
So Jennifer, we'll get back to you with the rule.
Excellent. And Jennifer McDowell, again, with one more question. Are we anticipating the data moving forward to review the success of field of studies to be coming from the CBM OOT?
So that's a great question. And I feel like we're in a place where we're beginning to have some new data collection efforts, and our whole data modernization project is actually going to serve as a wonderful resource for all our institutions. So I would call on Christina Zavala maybe to add in anything if she would like.
No, I think you're spot on, Stacy. And that is a good point, Jennifer, that you bring up. I think there were, some of the analysis that came out of the OOT that were just sort of more macro, just what are the patterns that we can sort of see here. And I think that one of the things that I'm excited about with this conversation that we've been having is thinking about new ways that we can continue to tease apart the data to get sort of a more clear picture with regards to, transfer students to, field of study complete, core complete, all of those different things. So I've been taking notes, throughout this meeting and making sure I keep track of, some of these suggestions for further analysis within the team.
And Todd, before we turn to you, if I can just let Jennifer McDowell and all of you all know that we have identified it as Rule 4.32. So it's the Texas Administrative Code, Title 19, Rule 4.32, Jennifer, talks about the directed electives, and courses chosen for directed electives must be listed in the ACGM. And I think, Todd, you are next.
Yeah, so I keep on not asking this question, so this may be an inappropriate moment for this question. I believe deeply in the mission of what we're doing. My wife teaches in early college high school. I love that we're working to make the path to graduation quicker, lower costs for students. But one of the sort of practical problems that I see, and I think Alvin Johnson raised this as well, is that on the ground in my university, I see lots of students who don't get Plan A. And they might go to the community college imagining that they're going to major in biology at my campus, but they don't get in to biology. And so one of the things I've been wondering is there a way to build in to what we're doing some sort of pathways for Plan B? You know, because I think one of the things I see in my college often is that students will imagine, if I don't get into insert major, business, biology, chemistry, something that puts them towards either a business trajectory that they see is the only true path for them, or a health sciences trajectory that they see as the only true path for them, they have a hard time imagining what they're going to do. And what ends up happening on many campuses is I think that those students end up in other majors without carefully considering how they might be able to achieve their career goals in other majors, you know, so that they don't get into the business school. Do we have a way of saying, hey, maybe you want to look at that econ field of study and consider a business minor? Because I think we're putting an awful lot of onus on students who don't have any reason to know how to navigate this, and often feel tremendous pressure. And I think this is especially true for many of our first generation and new American students, to follow certain career pathways because their families believe that they're the only legitimate pathways, when there might be other opportunities at the university. And I just see a lot of students who end up getting excess credits and struggle on the path to graduation because they don't get Plan A. And I love what we're doing, but I'm trying to figure out if there's some way to at least start a discussion about what we do for those students.
So I'll just jump in and say, I think your comments are spot on. It's, you know, transfer is difficult. Selecting a major is difficult. It's difficult if you know the system, and it's really difficult if you don't know the system. So I think some things that we're, as an agency, going to be able to do to help serve as a resource moving forward is the work in our advising area. And I don't know, Ray, I don't want to call you out, but if you want to jump in and talk a little bit about what we're doing related to our advising work and the work that ADVI is doing in the on-course. I think those are really exciting things that the agency is doing, which will help students, and they are student-centered.
Well, I'll simply amplify what you just said, and that is that, yes, there is, Commissioner Keller has prioritized many strands of work that we're doing with various parts of our agency that will improve how it is that we can support you all at the institutions in ensuring that we improve our from the agency perspective, the support that we provide for you all to provide effective, timely advising to the students. And so there's without going into a lot of detail, because I'm getting bombarded by Teams messages on my end from our staff that we are way behind schedule, and we don't want to hold you guys beyond your 11:30 timeframe. But Stacy is correct. We are doing a lot in this area, Todd, and I think this is something that we need to go ahead and expand upon and maybe add to our agenda for the next meeting. This advisory committee, again, it is a direct connection to Commissioner Keller. What you all choose to recommend. Again, the charges are pretty broad that we talked about earlier in our agenda. And while we hope that you'll focus on helping us to improve the existing field of study curriculum that's in place for across disciplines, it's a broad portfolio and broad charges, Todd. So I hope that's helpful, and we'll park that conversation for later, if that's okay.
I very much appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Other quick questions, because I'm being prodded to move this along as quickly as possible. And I also need to advise both Rebecca Leslie and Reinhold Cornelius that you need to please shorten your presentations. We're going to provide the slide decks to our TTAC members, and we'll post it for the public, of course, our slide decks. But I'm going to ask you both, as you go through your presentations, to do so in a pretty abbreviated manner so that we can get back to our co-chairs and talk about discipline-specific subcommittees before we get to the end of our time. So Laurel, I'm sorry that I sort of took the reins from you there. I hope that's okay. And thank you. And I'm gonna go ahead, and I don't see any more electronic hands raised, but just know that we are going to continue this conversation. We know there's a lot of information to digest. Our commitment is to make sure that you are fully informed as you make decisions as a member of this committee. Rebecca, I think you are next on the agenda. We'll turn to you next. Go right ahead, please.
Okay, Christina is putting up the slide deck. Thank you, Christina. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about the ACGM. I'm pretty enthused about it, what it does and what it is. And to start with, I'm going to tell you what it is and what it is not. It is for two-year schools. It is their inventory of courses. Unlike universities that have individual inventories, the community colleges choose the academic courses they will teach from the ACGM to be funded. It provides funding codes, learning outcomes, course descriptions, credit and contact hours, and they are intended to transfer. The ACGM does not include workforce courses. There's a whole nother manual for that. And we probably need a kind of a primer on acronyms. I'll refer to the ACGM as the ACGM going through. Next slide, please. A little history and background. The evolution of the ACGM. It's been around for quite a while. And in the beginning, it was just the SIP code. And then we tacked on a Texas two-digit code for reporting funding. But it was that broad general category of SIP. Then in the mid-90s, Texas Common Course Numbering was developed statewide and adopted by the two-year schools. And then in the 21st century, we've seen more detail in the course descriptions, courses that were grouped or broken apart. We started a very close detailed look at enrollments, and technology improved everyone's access to the ACGM. Next slide. Realities and aspirations. I have given you a notion of what the ACGM, now some of the hope fors in the future. We want to facilitate transfer for efficient completion of a bachelor's degree, but there is always room for improvement. The ACGM, and I say /TCCNS because it is, if it's not in the ACGM, it is not in the Texas Common Course Numbering System. They are, the courses involved are the same in both of those systems. And the hard lesson of transferability does not equal application to a degree. Hoping TTAC will work that out. ACGM and TC, this is for the universities. It's supposed to be all over your web pages. Unfortunately, some institutions, universities do a better job of this than others. So this makes more for the students. This is more for the students, but it's also for those community college advisors looking for equivalence. A student can complete core at the two-year school, but using ACGM courses, but sometimes those choices need to be better. Once again, this falls back to the charge to TTAC. Reporting is so important. For two-year schools, this is really straightforward because they use the ACGM and the TCCNS numbers as their internal catalog numbers. For universities, it's a little trickier because they have their own numbering systems and their own inventories with courses outside of the system. But conscientious and up-to-date reporting of equivalence is really, really key and helpful in looking at patterns. And then the Learning Outcomes Project, which is kind of under the umbrella of the ACGM, seeks to make sure that the students are equally and adequately prepared, whether or not they start at the university or they start at the community college, that they have the same preparation. So that's the object of that Learning Outcomes Project. Next slide. Okay. who are the people who oversee this? They're much like this committee. They're very diverse, equal numbers of university and college faculty. Also, we have advisors, enrollment managers, and administrators at various levels to help us make the decisions and go forward. Next slide. And like I said, the ACGM has evolved. The ACGM Advisory Committee is charged to make recommendations to the board for the addition, deletion, and modification of courses. As the amount and specificity of course of information has increased, so has the need to have processes in place to make changes. There are processes and forms to add courses. There are parameters in rules and thresholds that need to be met for inclusion. And the Learning Outcomes Project has been the vehicle for improving and updating courses. And occasionally also we will refer to professional academic discipline organizations. Examples of these would be the Mathematical Association of America, Texas section, Texas Speech Communication Association, American Historical Association, or examples of groups that we've consulted with when looking at courses. The structure of processes and the right kind of information has been key to the successful function of the manual and the committee. Next slide. Data and rules for decision. The process for the identification of obsolete and underutilized courses is data driven. That's one of the functions of the committee, is to get rid of courses. Don't leave them on the books indefinitely if they're not facilitating transfer. So in 2014, we started this process. And before this process was begun, the decisions were made on with limited disciplines, maybe one or two disciplines, and it was anecdotal kind of information. You had enrollments at the community college, but you didn't know what the universities were doing. But in 2014, we made it comprehensive and started looking at all the courses. And in the first year that we did this, there were over 300 courses scheduled for deletion or recommended to the board for deletion. It was easy when we had all this data before us. In the first year, we had 3 years of data, but now we have 5 years of data that we look at. You can see those patterns, and you can see where universities are reporting equivalence, and you can see what courses community colleges are teaching. That 300 were the low-hanging fruit. Nobody was offering those courses. And you might have an outlier community college that would offer one, but most of those had neither universities or community colleges offering. That was in 2014. We've continued this process every year. And so I think we've been successful in that. Out of the 500 or so courses, there are only 3 were appealed. And finally, the Learning Outcomes Project, they're responsible for the modification. And here again, the process and knowing the right kind of information. We look at who are producing graduates, and we have out to comment, we have faculty, and we make them do their homework before they come to the table. It's not enough that they know what they're doing at their institution. We collect syllabus from across the state, and they have to be aware of what's going on statewide, not just in your own backyard. And the course is in this are also reviewed by the ACGM committee. I'm going to conclude right there, and if you have questions, I'll be happy to take those.
Great. I think I'm going to jump in now as well and kind of keep moving us along with our agenda. Reinhold, thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate that presentation. Reinhold, I believe you're up with a brief overview of the Texas core curriculum. Reinhold.
Yes, welcome. I'm talking about the core curriculum, and because we have very little time left, I think that most of you actually are familiar with the core curriculum, and that if not, that you can always call me or email me. Most of you know that as well. If you have a problem or an issue with the core curriculum, you get in touch with me. So I think I will just leave you with that first slide here. And then if the slides are fairly self-explanatory, if you have questions, I can show you the slides and discuss them with you separately. But I would like to at least show you the statement of purpose, because that is really important for setting the stage for the core and much of the lower division education. The core curriculum is tasked to lay a foundation of knowledge about culture and physical and the natural world. Also, it should lay a foundation about social and personal responsibility in a diverse world. The core curriculum touches on skills essential for all future learning. Now, that's the purpose. And the structure and how it works, please look through the slides. And then again, here's the advertisement. If you have questions, call me. Thank you. And I think because we have only 40 minutes left, I will hand it over now to Elizabeth Mayer and Christina Zavala to talk about data included in the packet. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Reinhold. Good morning. I hope everyone is doing well. So we just wanted to provide some data, and I wanted to start by, you've already heard from her, but Christina Zavala is a program director for data analytics and innovation, and she's already shared some great comments and is working away on a lot of this transfer data in the OOT. So I just wanted to take a moment to introduce her, because she has been our go-to on all of this and has been really helpful. And it sounds like from the discussion, will continue to be an important partner as we move forward with this work. So I just wanted to kind of get us started off with that. So in the packet, you received some data that had 3 tables. And I'm going to let Christina go off in a second and talk about the first 2. But I did want to just point out, I'm sure many of you are aware, you see interdisciplinary studies at the top for this first one, that in 2019, there was legislation passed that actually included that education majors had historically been included in this, but based upon that legislation, they're now going to be pulled out and going to be able to be included in CIP code 13. And as I understand, institutions are starting to submit those changes. So I just want to let you know, interdisciplinary studies had historically included education, but because of that legislation in 2019, that is starting to get pulled out. So I think there will be some changes in that data as we move forward. So I just wanted to highlight that as an introduction to that first table. And now I'm just going to hand it over to Christina, and she will provide some additional information on tables 1 and 2, and then I will finish up with tables 3.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. So the first 2 tables that we see here really provide a snapshot into the top 25 majors that transfer students either graduate with or that they transfer to a 4-year university with. So this first table that we see here is for those students who the transfer students who graduated with a baccalaureate degree. And for the purpose of these three tables, we're defining transfer students as students who were found for the first time in college at a CTC, and that they had accumulated at least 30 semester credit hours at that at the 2-year level before transferring to a 4-year university. So as you can see in this first table, as Elizabeth mentioned, the interdisciplinary studies was really the most popular major at around 7.5%. We also see psychology and registered nursing at around 6%. And these three really are those majors or degrees with the highest percentages. If you go down to the next table, what we see here is for those students who transferred to a 4-year, what was their major. And so we see a similar breakdown in the top two majors being interdisciplinary studies and registered nursing again. And even in comparing those programs that you see in the first table and those programs that you see in the second table, really, they're pretty much all of the same program. The top 10 programs are pretty much the same. There's just a little bit of variation in the ranking that they appear in, but for the most part, you just see some general consistency and patterns with regard to sort of those top 10 programs that transfer students in particular are coming in with and are graduating with. And so just with that little brief overview, I will turn it to Elizabeth to talk about table 3.
So what we did is we provided the field of study completers from 2015 to 2020. And so this is based upon the community colleges reporting on the CBM 009. And so as you can see, really business and criminal justice have been in the top for the past several years. And English has kind of crept up in 2020. We went back and looked, and the data was, that's based upon what was reported. So those top three are really, at least for 2020, are business and commerce, English and criminal justice, and really with business and criminal justice having been the most highly reported for the last several years. So I think that concludes our presentation. And if you guys have any questions about the methodology or anything, it sounds like you all are very interested in maybe exploring some other data. And so we would be happy, probably at a later meeting to delve more fully into that. So I am now going to hand it back over to the co-chairs so they can provide an overview of the process for appointing discipline-specific subcommittees. So James?
Thank you, Elizabeth. So a key component of what TTAC does is identify what discipline-specific areas we'll be diving into and then working through a process whereby we have these discipline-specific subcommittees. So Laurel and I are going to share with you how that works, and we'll go from there. So those discipline-specific subcommittees are responsible for identifying those discipline-relevant courses for inclusion in the Discipline Foundation courses list. So that's that core curriculum piece, as well as the DFC in the models that we were showing you earlier. They got to select from the courses listed in the ACGM, and each discipline-specific subcommittee would report this DFC course list to TTAC, so reporting to us. We are not the discipline-specific subcommittee, but the discipline-specific subcommittee will report to TTAC. And then TTAC decides whether it will be recommended on to the commissioner for approval. So Christina, you're going on, there you go, on to slide 3. As you see on this slide, each discipline-specific subcommittee is comprised of an equal number of faculty from general academic teaching institutions and public junior colleges in a single discipline. And the chief academic officer of each institution which offers a degree program for which the field of study curricula is proposed may submit a recommended nominee, and a discipline-specific subcommittee can only be formed upon the affirmative vote of TTAC, us, our committee here. Next slide, Christina. As this slide shows, each discipline-specific subcommittee has specific duties. Perhaps the most important is that second bullet, which instructs the committee to recommendations for the list of courses to be included in the field of study curriculum for the discipline, including identifying discipline-related courses within the Texas core curriculum and a recommended set of discipline foundation courses. So slide 5, which kind of goes back to this, what I said at the beginning of the presentation, that the composition of the discipline-specific subcommittee will have equal representation of faculty in that specific discipline from 4- and 2-year institutions, and the commissioner has the final authority to select the members of the discipline-specific subcommittees. If you move on to slide 6, and Laura will take it from there.
Okay, thank you, James. So each member of a discipline-specific subcommittee can serve up to 3 years in a term or can be replaced by a new representative for that institution by the chief academic officer. Each subcommittee will select co-chairs, one each from community college and one from the general academic teaching institution, the university. Next slide, number 7. As you'll see, since each discipline-specific subcommittee, after it completes its work, will report to this committee, to TTAC, and the co-chairs of TTAC will nominate 2 members of this committee to serve on each of the discipline-specific subcommittees. The nominations by the TTAC co-chairs will be made to the commissioner, and he will have the final authority of who will serve. Next slide. Discipline-specific subcommittee process. And we're on slide 9 in this deck. Once this committee votes to form a discipline-specific, once TTAC votes to form a discipline-specific subcommittee, the coordinating board will send a call for nominations to all 2- and 4-year chief academic officers for a period of not less than 30 calendar days. And then the commissioner will finalize membership based on those nominations submitted. Next slide, please, number 10. And lastly, you can see here that once the discipline-specific subcommittee has been formed, the coordinating board will provide staff support, including data, logistics, participation in all subcommittee meetings, and other relevant needs. And I cannot emphasize enough how important this support was during our transfer work group, and how you will find that very supportive of your work, very ready to answer questions, to get data, help you with scheduling meetings if you need that. And so please be sure and use the staff to help you with this work. And now I'll invite James, as well as the coordinating board staff, to rejoin me as we open up things for comments and questions regarding this subcommittee process. To assist, we've included on slide 12 some questions that we thought, but we are not limited to these questions, but once we discuss these, we'd welcome questions and or comments. So James is going to begin with this item.
Yeah, so what we're, I don't think this part was scripted, was it? Yeah. So we've got this process where we're appointing discipline-specific subcommittees, and it's the intent of the co-chairs to entertain a motion for the formation of those 2 subcommittees. We'll be doing that in a few minutes when we get to that point, but we want to make sure that each of you have an understanding of what the process is at this point. So in addition to selecting the co-chairs, may a subcommittee form an executive committee to assist in carrying out its obligations. And I think we were a little uncomfortable with the word executive committee, but the concern that we were discussing amongst ourselves is that we want complete buy-in from universities and community colleges, everybody to be at the table, but that becomes an unwieldy group as you're talking about a group trying to make some recommendations and decisions. So we were pondering that a working group, the subcommittee, would be able to form some sort of subgroup to hammer out some details and come back to the working committee to then discuss, vote, and if they approve, forward on to TTAC for TTAC's consideration. And so the answer to number 1 is yes. they can conform some form of subcommittee within themselves to put together a draft proposal to come back to the subcommittee for further consideration before voting on and bringing it back to us in TTAC. How will those individuals be selected? I always like to say mystic insight, but that's probably not the right term for an official group like this. But we're still need to be working through those kinds of things. And in this first round of subcommittees that we're going to be suggesting that we vote on today, I think by practice we're going to figure out how we're going to do some of these things and make adjustments as we go. But certainly those individuals in the subcommittee should be selecting for themselves who should be in this smaller group that's hammering out the details, and there should be balance between community colleges and four-year universities, and making sure that the voices are represented, but understanding that 50 people working on a project is not going to result in a successful outcome, but 50 voices can be heard, while a smaller group of 6 or 8 or 10 or whatever the number might be can hammer out something that represents all of those voices. Other comments, discussion, questions on this kind of process we're talking about with the subcommittees?
Thank you, James. This is Jennifer McDowell from UTD. In relation to the answers you were trying to give for the first 2 questions, can you tell me how many institutions are we talking about at the community college level and then at the four-year institution level?
Well, it's going to vary by discipline. So a program that the language that's in the rules indicates that you have a right to have somebody in the subcommittee. You have a right to nominate somebody in the subcommittee if you are offering that program. So if you're talking about a program that most everybody offers, it may be as many as, in terms of the university side, 39. I think we have universities in the state. Theoretically, it could be every one of them. Now, that doesn't mean every one of them will submit a name, but they have the opportunity to have somebody at the table. In terms of the community college side, I believe we decided there are 50 community college districts, and those 50 districts would, and again, theoretically have the opportunity to have somebody at the table. One of the things that is in the coordinating board's operating rules procedures is that this has to be balanced. So when we get the actual number of nominees from those institutions, if there are 35 universities and 45 community colleges, the coordinating board is going to have to be working through that, and as the commissioner makes the appointments to these, is going to have to be working through that to seek balance. I'd say at the university side, we will seek out more individuals to serve on it, but it may be that there are some community colleges who are not in that hypothetical scenario, who are not able to participate at the table in order to have that balance. Ray, is that a fair statement? I think that's my understanding of what we had discussed.
You did a great job, James. That's exactly right. Our obligation from the agency side is to ensure that there is an equal number from each sector. And again, just as you explained, we're going to do the call for nominations. And as we've said, we will do a call for nominations for a minimum of 30 days. It'll go to all CAOs across the state for our community colleges and our public 4 years. If we get, as you said, 30 nominations from our 4 years and 35 from our community colleges, we'll have to do 30 and 30. And so the commissioner will just have to decide. We'll just take a look at, as we usually do for any kind of either formal or informal advisory committee, we'll try to ensure that there is the right institutional diversity that's represented from each sector as we try to even it out. But we do need to have an even number. If we hear that there is a lot of interest in a particular major, and community college want to have, a certain amount, and we don't have that number, we'll work with you all to maybe sort of extend the call so that we can increase the number of community college, so that we can have a better mix at the table and ensure that there is the right number of representation for each sector. But again, our commitment is to make sure that you all feel bought into this process. And if there's for some reason oh, well, we only got 15 from the general academic side and we got 35 from the community college side. We'll work with each sector. We'll work with your co-chairs to make sure that we do everything we can from the agency to get a proper balance. And it will always be an equal representation, no matter what. At the end of the day, the commissioner will choose equally the same number from the community college side, the same number from the university side for each subcommittee that you all vote to form. So, yeah.
A high priority, Jennifer, it may be helpful to know, a high priority for from the working group was assuring that everybody's voice had an opportunity to be heard. And it was, right or wrong, the feeling amongst many in the university sector particularly, I'll speak only for that has not always been the case. And that's why we are working with this rather large open process, trying to make sure every voice has the opportunity to be heard. Will it be perfect? Probably not, but that's the goal, is to allow every voice to be heard.
Other questions? Marmoush.
I just want to double check that I get it right. Like each institution look at the program that they offer and they nominate one person for each program, right? And you're gonna pick between them.
Go ahead, James. Yeah. Go ahead.
So that we're gonna do each committee, subcommittee on its own. So we're gonna do business. And then separate from that, we're going to do psychology, and separate from that, we'll do criminal justice. And we're not going to do all of them at once, but we're going to start off and kind of build our way through. So it'd be one individual. Let's just say we're talking about business. One individual from business from your college. Yes, that is correct. But the reason I wanted to clarify that is I wasn't sure if you meant one individual, and that individual would have to be representing multiple different disciplines. No, it's one individual from that discipline from your college.
And that person should just represent one of the committee. It cannot be one person represent two different committee. If my institution wants to nominate one person for two different committees, it's not possible, right?
I don't know of any reason why they shouldn't. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The intention of these is to have somebody from the discipline, but it may well be that one person, for example, a department head who has overseen, multiple disciplines that are related, that person may well be the most knowledgeable person to serve. Absolutely. Any other questions on this, the process for the subcommittees? Hearing none, I'm going to step into the next phase, which is a little scary. But based on the data that the coordinating board has provided us, it's the opinion of the co-chairs that we should form discipline-specific subcommittees for the current field of study on business administration and management, and a second discipline-specific subcommittee for the current field of study on criminal justice. If you remember back from the data that Elizabeth just shared, that there's some consistency there, that those are two that would be reasonable to start with. And frankly, we also wanted to start with something that we felt like might be manageable in our first effort through the process. So we just wanted to keep it to a couple, and a couple that we think may be able to work, but also have a significant impact on students very quickly. So that's what Laurel and I are proposing. So these two field of studies, as I said, are the most completed, and according to the current data, and we believe these two would be an appropriate place to start with the new framework. So if you all agree to forming these two subcommittees, the coordinating board will immediately issue a call for nominations, and all chief academic officers of our community colleges and public four-year universities will have those for those specific disciplines. And I'm happy to open the floor to discussion and or a motion for each separate subcommittee. Any discussion that we want to have on establishing these two subcommittees?
James, which the two we're talking about, the ones from table 1?
I don't have the table in front of me, but it's table 3.
It's table 3. Yeah, it's table 3. It's table 3.
Table 3, because that was the field of study completers. And business is at the top, criminal justice is number 3, but number 2 is a rather recent addition. But if you look at the last 5 years of data, business and criminal justice are the 2 that have had by far the most field of study completers over the last 5 years. And so we are recommending that those be 2 that we tackle first. Additional discussion?
You looking at a timeline for this, James, Fred?
Yeah, by next week. Is that all right?
Oh, yeah, I think they'll be done by then. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, so we had some discussion on that. Of course, you've got I believe it was a 30-day call that comes from the coordinating board. So the call would happen immediately, and how quick is immediately? I don't know, but let's say certainly by next week. I would hope immediately, maybe sooner. But that pushes you into early July. We are proposing meeting again in August. It probably is maybe unrealistic to think that the group would have any kind of feedback by then, but we would at least have a sense of how the process is moving along. But we want this, once the individuals are named from the institution, nominated from the institution, and the commissioner has named it, we would expect that they would jump on it as quickly as possible and meet, much as we did, Fred, as frequently as possible, to be able to turn around a proposal and get it back to us as quickly as possible. So I don't know that we have established a deadline other than as quickly as we can turn it around, because what we hope to be able to do is have these 2 well underway, maybe even completed relatively quickly, so we can then add more, so that we would have multiple going. And as a reminder, there'll be 2 members from this group, from TTAC, assuming the commissioner appoints them, but it'll be our recommendation. But there'll be 2 members from TTAC on each of these subcommittees. So you would not be necessarily serving on very many subcommittees, but you would be serving on a subcommittee from time to time. And what Laurel and I intend to do, if I can speak for Laurel, is to, as best as possible, match up your academic expertise and background with the discipline being considered.
The method to my madness, and I think it's already been brought up, is I know on the community college side, a lot of people are looking at those 6 or 8, I can't remember, fields of study that are on hold right now. I think the other fields of study are moving ahead until 2025. And I think the ones you picked are some easy, quick victories we can move forward on. I agree, but I can tell you that's going to be one of the concerns is, so when are you going to let these other ones go, and how soon can we get to those? That's why I'm bringing them up as an issue.
Yeah, and I think that was the Lisa's comment earlier about, concern about the mathematics that is kind of on hold. And I hear you, and I think it's real important that we have 2 that have huge impact and 2 that may be quickly manageable. And that was a big driver in this.
And I think that we wanted, if I could jump in here, we wanted to pick some, Fred, you're very right, that were complete and were in place and had transfer students in those pathways, so that we could refine our process, right? We could see where this wasn't working, or where there were places we need to make some tweaks in the process itself, knowing that we're in statute and it's defined for us, but where did this not work well? And so that's why we're also hoping that the subcommittees that we put together today would at least have a progress report. It may not be complete by the meeting in August, but they would give us a progress report on the process and how that was going and whether something wasn't working well.
I make the motion then that we proceed with the business and the criminal justice subcommittees to start the process.
I second the motion.
Let's do these separate, James and Laurel, if that's okay, because our counsel's not with us now, but she had instructed that we have 2 separate motions. So Fred, maybe you can amend your motion.
Okay, I'll start with, I make a motion that we do the business subcommittee, and then I'll make the next motion.
Okay, so I have a motion for the business administration and management Subcommittee. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
James, can I stop real quick? Jennifer has her hand raised. I don't know if that's from a previous comment. Jennifer.
Yes, thank you. I was just considering the data, and I think if we're looking to do the things that we have said that we'd like these subcommittees to do, I believe we're missing information on which areas of our state and which stakeholders have a good understanding of how well both of these fields of study completions have been going. We have total numbers of students of completers, but we don't have the information of where these completers are from.
So it'd be which community colleges they're coming from? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that we could ensure the subcommittee has some expertise.
Oh, well, everybody gets to be in it. So whether you're good at it or bad at it, you are allowed at the table. But yeah, I actually, that's one of the things that Laurel and I talked about. I don't remember if we talked to the coordinating board staff or not, but she and I have talked about is asking the question and figuring out where is this working well, and understanding that should be part of the subcommittee's discussion. This model is working well between school X and school Y. And I think that is part of the discussion that needs to be certainly at least fed into the subcommittee process. And I think TTAC needs to be knowledgeable of that as well. I don't know if we have to be knowledgeable of that at this process, but we certainly need to be knowledgeable about it at some point in the process.
And James and I, in that conversation, we, conversely said we would identify where it's working well. We would also, the subcommittee would identify where it's not working well. Those are the issues that the subcommittee probably will be taking under consideration and talk about. It's not working because of this, this, and this. What can be changed about that, field of study? So I think that information will be something that we can turn to the coordinating board and say, we'd like to have that for the subcommittee.
Additional discussion? We have a motion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Sure. All opposed, say no. Okay. We'll proceed with the Business Administration and Management Subcommittee. And I would like for us to note in our notes as we're moving forward what the discussion just there that Jennifer brought up and Laurel and I mentioned, because I think that is a key component as we move forward on this. Do I have a motion for criminal justice?
Make the motion, we move on the criminal justice subcommittee. That's Fred Hills.
Thank you, Fred. Is there a second?
Second.
Archie Blanson.
I heard several seconds. Do we have one name that somebody was noting? Whoever's keeping track of this.
Dr. Blanson was in there.
Okay.
Yes, I heard Archie Blanson.
Very good.
Yes.
Thank you, Archie.
You bet.
So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on criminal justice? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, no. I heard many ayes and no noes, so we will say that that was unanimous. Laurel.
All right. Well, we are coming down to the final wire here. Thanks, James. This item on the agenda is informational only, and it's to let you know that our second meeting of TTAC will be Thursday, 19 August 2021. Our expectation is that by this second meeting, we will have at least a progress report, some information from our discipline-specific subcommittees, And perhaps, depending on how far those groups get, we may be able to take action on their recommendations. We will, at the meeting in August, also consider the appointment of additional discipline-specific subcommittees at that time. So please, everyone, mark your calendar for Thursday, August the 19th. The coordinating board will provide additional information between now and then on the second meeting, and we will sort of expect an in-person meeting to be held at the coordinating board office in Austin. Again, we are looking at allowing virtual remote participation as well. So Ray, before we close out and I ask for that final motion, do you have any final comments?
Thank you, Laurel. The final comment I'll make are two real quick. The first is we will work with your co-chairs as we think about the full agenda for your second meeting on August the 19th. So any thoughts that you all have about the content of the agenda, please communicate with your co-chairs. And then the last thing I want to do is a complete oversight on my part. There are two of our colleagues from the agency that I failed to recognize at the beginning. I knew this was going to happen, and I do apologize to my colleagues. Christina Zavala, you've already heard, a program director who runs our data and will be with us throughout this process. Christina, thank you for all that you do and for all that you will do. And Christina Kelly, who is on the staff with Stacy and the Division of Academic and Health Affairs. She is the person who will help us with logistics and scheduling and a lot of other important matters, including having guided us through the PowerPoint process in this meeting. Christina Kelly, thank you for all that you do on our behalf. Laurel, thank you for letting me correct my mistakes there. I appreciate that. I'll turn it, and thank you all for your time today and for your participation. We greatly appreciate you. Laurel, back to you.
Okay. And yes, my thanks, James, and I thank your participation and your close attention, the good questions, the good comments. It gives us something to think about and to move forward with. And so this concludes our meeting today, and we look forward again to seeing you again in August. And so do I have a motion to adjourn?
I, Sylvia Flores, make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Right. Dr. Flores, do I have a second?
Second.
Scott, seconding.
Second from Dr. Scott. All right. I could just say anyone objecting, you very rarely hear an objection to an adjournment, you know. So all those in favor, please say yes.
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 And as I conjecture, are there anyone that doesn't want to end this meeting? All right. Thank you very much. It's been great, and I'm looking forward to the work ahead and to working with each of you.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.